Obviously, digital technologies are not new. We've been living with them for many, many years now. What's changing is the way they're being used. And this is a really, really exciting and challenging theme which we've been exploring. I've been exploring in research for the past couple of years. And I do have to make a couple of acknowledgements here. First to Admiral Chris Barry, who sort of took what was just a little hobby initially on my part and said, go for it. And then enabled me to meet with Derek Wilner, my supervisor, and who's always been dragging me up to the strategic level, where I keep wanting to come down to the operational level. So certainly 2 thanks for that. What we're looking at, and when I talk about stuff, you'll find it familiar because it's here and now. But the important thing is to understand these are trends which we're observing, and we're looking at the medium term. We're looking at between 7 and 10 years, so it's important to look at that. So, when a 28-year-old US State Department official named Jared Cohen telephones the 33-year-old entrepreneur who runs the website Twitter and persuades him to postpone a maintenance shutdown so that news, pictures and messages from protests in Iran can reach the outside world, I think it's fair to say we're on the edge of a new paradigm of public diplomacy. When the United Nations launches an investigation as a result of mobile phone videos posted on the internet, which lead to the departure of an African dictator, we see the global impact that social media can have on international affairs. When Greenpeace and other international activist organizations can stand up to powerful business interests in India and force the government to abandon support for an industrial plant in a sensitive tribal area, we're seeing internet lobbying in action, which bypasses state-to-state dialogue. It was fascinating to watch this campaign against Vedanta in the tribal areas, and the campaign was led by Joanna Lumley and Bianca Jagger, and the campaign based itself on the film Avatar. And it was really skillfully done, and within 12 months, a multi-billion-dollar plant was abandoned. And that's the power of social media against international business. When we see Google Earth being used to reveal secret airfields in Pakistan, from where the United States deploys drone aircraft to hit Taliban targets, we're seeing new usages of this technology to tear down the veils of government secrecy. When we see a suicide bomber streaming pictures live from his mobile phone as he approaches a group of Westerners in the Marriott Hotel in Jakarta in 2009, we're left with little doubt as to the power of the imagery to inspire those who wish to follow in his wake. The images are recorded and posted on the web by the bomber's handler, who you can hear urging him on to martyrdom. And when we see China announcing a breathtaking expansion of both its news gathering and internet television broadcasting services, and its rival India acquiring assets such as Virgin Radio, buying a share in Bloomberg Television, and joint venturing with Steven Spielberg, we're witnessing the rise of a form of soft power which it behoves this country to stand up and pay attention to. Many more such public diplomacy-related events are occurring right now. And here's a glimpse of the world in which they occur and why we need to involve ourselves in it. Half of humanity is under 30. Within the next decade, Chinese will overtake the North Americans as the largest users of the internet. Indians will be the second largest community online. The predominant languages forecast for the net during this time are Mandarin, Spanish, Russian, Hindi, and Portuguese. When we look ahead, the future in terms of influence and new media, particularly in our region, becomes even more fascinating. As of the 30th of June this year, 825 million people in Asia were online. By 2012, Asian web surfers, including about 490 million Chinese, will outnumber North Americans by 3 to 1. And Indians, as we've said, will become the second largest group online. Across the Middle East, young people make up a relatively high percentage of the internet population in particular. More than 50% of the population in Yemen, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Morocco and Egypt are estimated to be under 25. In the rest of the countries, the under 25 net generation makes up around 35 to 47% of the total population. Now, all these young people online share similar characteristics. A disdain for traditional media, valuing peer-to-peer networks, sharing of videos either created by them or valued by them for activism. Many young people use only the internet to get their news and use only social network sites to communicate with and influence each other. They rely totally on the internet for all their information. They have challenged authority and will continue to do so. How effectively they'll be transforming of regimes or society remains to be seen, but there are three key elements which are emerging when we study these audiences. They are the leaders of tomorrow. The first is their concept of accepting the image as truth. They're quick to separate and identify the real from propaganda. And once the truth of the image is accepted, they flash it worldwide through their own networks, faster than any network of multinational or multilingual satellite television programs can do. For example, the pictures from protests in Tehran, enabled by Twitter and YouTube, showed Iranian militia gunning down a 28-year-old bystander, Nega Aga Sultan, making her the first internet martyr and causing the Iranian government to tone down its violence. At the same time, other Twitter messages brought out hundreds of thousands of residents of Tehran onto their rooftops nightly to shout out Allahu Akbar. It didn't change much, but what we're seeing is the potential for these kinds of events to play a major role. In the military sphere, as we've seen in Afghanistan, cell phone images have forced changes in the rules of engagement, highlighted the death of civilians, and led to the resignation of Germany's head of armed forces and its deputy foreign minister when they tried to cover up results of German-called airstrikes, pictures of which were already circulating on the internet. Since then, we've seen several instances of the power of videos hitting the internet and causing government policies to stumble. The second element is the emergence of what I call new nodes of trust. In the past, most of what we learned came from mainstream media. When looking at sources of information, journalists, and as a result their audiences, relied on official communiques or briefings as one such node. In addition, journalists conducted their own interviews, although often through interpreters, with significant players in countries where English was not widely spoken. In the past, these were essentially the main reliable sources in trying to find the truth behind claims from either side of a conflict. This was also the comfort zone by which governments exerted influence through the mainstream media. Now, new media technologies have changed this concept of the node of trust. It can now be an individual, it can be a website such as WikiLeaks, it can be a network such as Al-Qaeda, it can be a blog such as that of Ahmed Rashid from Lahore, it can be an internet TV channel such as Al Jazeera, which people turn to for information. From a cubicle in Midtown Manhattan, a Nigerian publishes staggering examples of his government's corruption online, his country's government's corruption online, information that would get him killed back home. Philip Sowore, a 39-year-old political dissident from Nigeria, now in exile in New York, has created a website that has been referred to as Africa's WikiLeaks. It is the evolution of these nodes of trust in the future that governments will need to monitor and engage with if they are to successfully gain the attention of target audiences. So the question is, can governments provide the framework and environment to allow their participants to be accepted as part of the specific audience, which is also a community for discussion of important issues? And we need to be mindful of the fact that in future, these nodes of trust will be dominant in languages other than English, in Mandarin, in Hindi, in Russian, and so on. And the core element of this engagement is the reliance on truth as opposed to spin when projecting a message. And this is probably the hardest thing for governments to do. As the father of the concept of soft power, Joseph Nye, put it a few months ago, reputation has always mattered in world politics, but credibility has become crucial because of the paradox of plenty. When information is plentiful, the scarce resource is attention. Under the new conditions, a soft sell may more than ever prove more effective than a hard sell. Traditional communication practices used by governments are losing both trust and relevance. This only increases the urgency of governments coming out to understand the future importance of nodes of trust as interlocutors and the crucial role of open two-way dialogue in the environment of the new media. This requires governments to populate images in cyberspace on the basis of their acceptance as truth by informal, popular online networks that constitute the broadcasting element of the new media. And this is a very far cry from the pumping out of pre-prepared releases on the mainstream media. The third and very fundamental nature of this audience is its drive to be participatory, to wish for a dialogue and to enter a discussion with the authors of policy, be they government departments, private think tanks, jihadist websites. Authorities, particularly those involved in armed conflict, are finding it harder or well nigh impossible to control messages in the social media sphere. Instead of viewing the new media technologies as an opportunity to build relationships with and reach new audiences, they nervously try to impose more controls and censorship. It remains to be seen how effective controls and censorship will be in preventing the spread of knowledge people want to see and hear. Even the Great Firewall of China, as we know by research, is one which the savvy are already breaching with ease. Into this mix now, throw in new channels which challenge the information hegemony and influence of the West, and we see why the need to view public diplomacy through new eyes becomes important. Well, once the account of the West was dominant because of the control of international media sources by Western corporations, credible counter-narratives led by Al Jazeera challenged the Western worldview. In Al Jazeera, the Arab world, for example, found a channel which was credible, provided images which the West had hitherto censored, and gave viewers a forum for interactivity, as well as a place for their own user-generated images. Here was a network that displayed independence, spoke the language of its target audience, and could gain access to areas forbidden to Western correspondents. Increasingly, its raw footage is being used by Western mainstream sources, and in doing so, it's added to the credibility and the precious commodity of trust that it's begun to garner. Indeed, after trying to discredit it initially, a parade of Western leaders, both military and civilian, eagerly sought to leverage credibility by allowing themselves to be interviewed on this channel. In his book, The Clash of Civilizations, Samuel Huntington forecast, the great divisions among humankind and the dominating source of conflict will be cultural. There is now a fierce satellite TV and internet TV battle for the hearts and minds of this pan-Arabic audience. Russia and France have a nearly 24-hour-a-day Arabic news channel there. Deutsche Welle TV from Germany has expanded the service, and the BBC has restored the cutbacks it made to its Arabic TV channel. And in recognition of this market, Rupert Murdoch has just powered with a Saudi prince to set up his own Arabic TV channel into the region. While Al Jazeera and its fellows and imitators continue to battle for acceptance into the living rooms of the audiences of the West, there is a looming and interesting prospect for a parallel or even stronger center of gravity for trust in the international information field, and that's India. And hard on its heels comes the more formal attempt of a global media sphere sponsored by the state power of China. What appears to be happening in India and China underscores the Al Jazeera model as pointing to the future of media-transmitted soft power. Al Jazeera exercises soft power because Arabs in the region and around the world are hooked on it for what it offers: controversial and candid views on the burning issues of the day and the breaking of taboos on what should be discussed. The Western narrative in the developed world, once the sole preserver of Western mass media because it owned the source of images, the editing of information, as well as the transmission channels, is now countered by locally owned and locally based mass media.